The last photo he posted was on Easter Sunday. He is smiling. 7 children surround him. Some are leaning into him. Some are looking at the camera. They are dressed for the holiday. The photo looks like what it appears to be, a father and his kids on a Sunday in the morning light. 4 days later, he posted something else. Not a photo. A prayer. It read, "Dear God, today I ask you to help me guard my mind and my emotions. When negativity arises, remind me to say, it does not belong to me." Experts who study behavioral warning signs have a specific term for that kind of shift. A public display of warmth followed by a sudden turn towards spiritual crisis language. A man who is showing people what he wants them to remember while privately fighting something he cannot name out loud. Mental health professionals call it a goodbye pattern. Not always, not every time, but often enough that when investigators piece together a timeline after the fact, that kind of post sits at the top of the list. Nobody flagged it, nobody called, nobody checked. And on the morning of April 19, 2026, in the Cedar Grove neighborhood of Shreveport, Louisiana, 8 children between the ages of 3 and 11 were shot and killed. 7 of them were his own. This is not a story about a single morning. This is a story about everything that led to it, every door that was open, and every system that chose not to walk through it. Every warning that was issued, and every institution that looked the other way. The morning of April 19th was not the beginning. It was the end of a sequence that started years earlier. And when you see that sequence assembled from beginning to end, the question that stays with you is not what happened. The question is why nobody stopped it. Shamar Elkins was born on December 7, 1994, in Shreveport. His early life was not easy. His biological mother, Mahalia, has said publicly that she was struggling with addiction when he was born and that she gave him to a family friend named Betty Walker to raise. Betty described him, in the days after April 19th, as a man she had watched grow up. She said she had seen the family just the previous weekend for dinner. She saw nothing coming. Nobody who knew him saw nothing coming, and that is precisely the problem this video is going to sit with for the next several minutes. In 2013, Elkins joined the Louisiana Army National Guard. He served as a signal support system specialist and a fire support specialist. He was never deployed. He served until 2020 and left as a private. After the military, he went to work for UPS. He had children with 2 women. Christina Snow, his first wife, was the mother of 3 of his kids. Shaniqua Pugh, who he married in 2024, was the mother of 4 more. 7 children across 2 relationships, and by every account from the people who knew him, he was present for them. He showed up. He celebrated birthdays. He posted photos. He coached soccer on weekends. He was described, repeatedly and consistently, as a devoted father. That word, devoted, is the word that makes this case so difficult to process. Because devoted fathers do not do what Shamar Elkins did on April 19th. And yet, Shamar Elkins did it. Which means something was happening inside that devotion that nobody was equipped to see, or willing to see, or given the tools to address before it reached the point of no return. The first documented sign that something was wrong came in 2015. A DWI conviction, 1 entry in a court record, a fine, a note in a database. In isolation, it means almost nothing. In the context of what came later, it is the first data point in a pattern. The second sign came in March of 2019. This one is harder to dismiss. On March 18, 2019, Elkins was arrested after reports of shots fired near Caddo Middle Magnet School in Shreveport. According to the police report, he fired 5 rounds from a 9mm handgun at a vehicle approximately 280 feet from the school fence line. Children were outside on the playground when the rounds were fired. 1 bullet passed through a shed and struck the top post of the school fence before ricocheting. Elkins told officers that the driver of the other vehicle had pulled a weapon first and that he fired in response. He was arrested. He was charged with illegal use of a weapon and carrying a firearm on school property. And then something happened that would become one of the central questions of this entire case. The firearm charge was dismissed. The illegal use of weapons charge resulted in a guilty plea. A Caddo Parish District Judge sentenced him to court costs, a $50 fine, and 1 year at hard labor, suspended. He was placed on 18 months of supervised probation and walked out of that courtroom with no prison time and no permanent firearms ban. Under Louisiana's gun possession statute, only certain categories of felony convictions trigger an automatic and permanent prohibition on firearm ownership. Elkins' conviction, as structured by the plea agreement, fell outside those categories. The legal threshold was not crossed. The door that should have closed stayed open. Elkins served his probation. He completed it. He went back to his life. He went back to his children. He went back to UPS. And the gun that 5 rounds were fired from near a school playground where children were playing became a legal non-event. A line in a court record that technically existed but practically meant nothing. This is the case ledger. If this is your first time here, we follow evidence. We don't protect powerful people. We don't move on until the case moves. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next in this one. Sometime in the years that followed, Elkins began experiencing what his family and friends have described as a serious deterioration in his mental health. The details that have emerged since April 19th paint a picture of a man who was struggling visibly and reaching out repeatedly, and a system that responded inadequately at nearly every point of contact. Relatives say that at some point before the shooting, Elkins attempted suicide. He sought help through the Department of Veterans Affairs. He was admitted to a VA hospital for a mental health evaluation. His brother-in-law, Troy Brown, has said publicly that Elkins stayed at the facility for approximately a week and a half before he was released. Released, not transitioned into long-term care, not connected to a sustained outpatient program with regular follow-up. Released. There is a specific kind of institutional failure that does not announce itself. It happens quietly, in the gap between what a system is designed to do and what it actually does when resources are thin and beds are limited and the paperwork says the patient is stable enough to go home. A week and a half. That was what the VA had to offer a man who had attempted to take his own life. In the months that followed his release, the pressure in Elkins' personal life continued to build. His marriage to Shaniqua Pugh had been fracturing. Pugh had filed for divorce over infidelity. According to reporting from the New York Times, Elkins had told Pugh at some point that if she left him, he would kill her, their children, and himself. That statement, that specific statement, was known to people in his immediate circle. It is the kind of statement that mental health professionals and domestic violence advocates describe as a lethality indicator, a direct verbal expression of intent that statistically correlates with elevated risk of exactly what occurred on April 19th. It is unclear whether that statement was ever reported to law enforcement. Shreveport police said they had no prior record of domestic violence complaints involving Elkins. No prior record. The statement existed. The people who heard it existed. The report does not. On Easter Sunday, April 5, 2026, Elkins called his mother and stepfather. His stepfather, Marcus, told reporters that during the call, Elkins said he was struggling, that his wife wanted a divorce, that he was having dark thoughts. Marcus told him, "You can beat stuff, man. I don't care what you're going through. You can beat it." And then Elkins said something that Marcus has been living with since April 19th. He said, "Some people don't come back from their demons." The call ended. Nobody called the VA. Nobody contacted a crisis line on his behalf. Nobody called the police for a welfare check. The call ended, and the family carried the weight of it, and 2 weeks passed. On April 9th, 10 days before the shooting, Elkins posted the prayer on Facebook, "Guard my mind and my emotions. When negativity arises, remind me to say, it does not belong to me." Behavioral analysts who have reviewed the post in retrospect have described it as consistent with someone in acute psychological distress who is attempting to self-regulate through public expression because private channels have failed them or been exhausted. He was telling people something publicly on social media with his name attached to it. Nobody called. On April 18th, the day before the shooting, Elkins shared a photo of his eldest daughter eating a burger. A normal photo. A father documenting a moment. It is the kind of post that people scroll past without reading anything into it, and in isolation, there is nothing to read. But in context, after the Easter Sunday prayer, after the phone call to his mother, after the week and a half in a VA facility, after a suicide attempt, after years of a fracturing marriage and a firearms conviction that resulted in probation and a $50 fine, in context, it sits differently. The next morning, April 19th, was a Sunday. It was also the day before he and Shaniqua were scheduled to appear in court to finalize the divorce. At approximately 5:55 in the morning, Shreveport police received an emergency call reporting a disturbance at a home on the 300 block of West 79th Street. The caller said a man had been shot and the suspect was still inside. Within minutes, additional calls confirmed that multiple people had been shot inside the residence. Officers arrived and found the first scene. The investigation would ultimately span 4 separate locations across Shreveport and into neighboring Bossier City. 8 children were dead, 5 girls and 3 boys, ranging in age from 3 to 11. Jayla Elkins, 3 years old. Shayla Elkins, 5 years old. Braylon Snow, 5 years old. Kadarian Snow, 6 years old. Kayla Pugh, 6 years old. Layla Pugh, 7 years old. Marcaden Pugh, 10 years old, the son of Shaniqua's brother, the children's cousin. Soraya Snow, 11 years old. Shaniqua Pugh, Elkins' wife, was shot and hospitalized with serious injuries. Christina Snow, his former wife, was also shot and hospitalized. At approximately 6:15 in the morning, Elkins carjacked a vehicle and led officers on a pursuit into Bossier City, roughly 15 miles away. At 6:29, officers confronted him. A preliminary autopsy report concluded that Elkins died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 31 years old. In the days that followed, investigators turned their attention to the weapon. Elkins had a felony conviction from 2019. Under federal law and under the interpretation of Louisiana's firearms statute as it applied to his specific plea, he was prohibited from legally owning a gun. And yet he had one, a .22 caliber Mossberg 715P, an assault-style pistol. On April 21st, federal agents arrested a 56-year-old Shreveport man named Charles Ford. Ford was a convicted felon. He was not permitted to possess firearms. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Louisiana, Ford had previously owned the weapon Elkins used on April 19th. Investigators determined that Elkins likely stole the gun from Ford's truck in the weeks before the shooting. Ford initially denied possessing the firearm to ATF agents. He later admitted he had kept it under his seat. He was charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm and making a false statement to federal investigators. 2 convicted felons, 1 gun, 8 dead children. U.S. Attorney Zachary Keller said in a statement that his office was investigating every angle of how the tragedy came to occur, and in particular, how Elkins secured the firearm he used. The statement was careful and measured, but the underlying reality it was describing was not. A man who had fired shots near a school where children were playing was given probation and a $50 fine and allowed to remain in a legal category that did not prohibit him from owning guns. A man who had attempted suicide was held in a VA facility for a week and a half and then released into the same environment that had been compressing him for years. A man who told his mother he was not coming back from his demons called no one back 2 weeks before April 19th. Every one of those moments was a door. Every one of those doors had someone standing on the other side with the authority to open it or close it. A judge who structured a plea deal, a VA administrator who signed a discharge form, a family member who carried a phone call alone, a court system that scheduled a divorce hearing for April 20th and did not flag the man required to appear as someone who had recently expressed suicidal and homicidal ideation. Shreveport City Council member Tabitha Taylor broke down in tears at a press conference on April 20th. She said, "This is not a freaking joke. This is real. And this is the result when someone snaps." She said domestic violence in her community was staggering. She said 30% of homicides in Shreveport were domestic in nature. She said the group most affected was African American women. 30%. In a city of 180,000 people. Councilman Grayson Boucher used the word epidemic, not a metaphor, a clinical description of a public health crisis that had been building in that community for years and that manifested on the morning of April 19th in the most devastating way imaginable. Andrew McCabe, former FBI deputy director, said investigators would examine whether this constituted family annihilation, a man who decided that if he could not have them, no one would. It is one of the most studied and most consistently under-recognized patterns in domestic violence homicide. It is almost always preceded by warning signs that are easy to dismiss individually and impossible to ignore collectively. Shamar Elkins made his intentions known on a phone call on Easter Sunday, in a Facebook post on April 9th, in a statement to his wife that people in her circle heard and carried, in a week and a half at a VA facility that ended with a discharge and a return to the same life. Every system that touched Shamar Elkins in the years before April 19th had access to at least one piece of what was building. No single system had all of it. No single institution was connecting the criminal record to the mental health history, to the domestic situation, to the social media posts, to the phone call, to the court date. That is not an accident of circumstance. That is a structural failure. Systems designed in isolation from each other, funded inadequately, and staffed by people overwhelmed with caseloads produce outcomes that look, in retrospect, like they should have been preventable. Betty Walker, the woman who raised Shamar Elkins, said she had seen the family the weekend before. She saw nothing. She said it directly. She saw nothing coming. And that, more than anything else in this case, is the sentence that stays. A woman who loved him, who raised him, who sat at a table with him and his children 1 week before April 19th. She saw nothing. Because what was building inside him had learned over years of insufficient intervention and inadequate support to stay invisible, to present as a devoted father on Easter Sunday, and a man asking God to guard his mind on April 9th, and a normal person eating dinner on a Saturday night. The invisibility was not a trick. It was a symptom, and the systems that are supposed to see through symptoms like that had been failing long before the morning they failed completely. 8 children, 3 years old to 11, a Sunday morning in Cedar Grove, Louisiana, a court date on Monday that would never happen. The question this case demands is not what happened on April 19th. The question is what happened in the years before it, in every room where a decision was made, in every institution that had a file with his name on it, in every moment where the door was open and nobody walked through. That question does not have a comfortable answer, and it will not go away.